Hello, hello. This is Peter, and in this walkthrough, we'll look at the new Azure Developer CLI. In another episode of one of these videos, I've shown Azure DevOps Starter, which is the current, and Azure Developer CLI is in preview. And it has a completely different approach. The number one, I think, is the fact that this is command line based. And so, although I love Azure DevOps Starter as a concept, the fact that you can use this in automation is obviously very interesting. The other thing is that Azure Developer CLI templates are extensible and easier than Azure DevOps Starter. So, in that sense, I think there's two benefits to it. But other than that, there's no time for religious wars. They both provide ways to deploy any kind of application you have in any language onto any compute service in Azure, right? So in the previous example, we showed a Node app to an app service, and you can deploy Node also to AKS or do Java to app service, right? So there's lots of options. Okay, so developer CLI is new. It's called AZD, and there's a workflow in the docs. One important thing is the description of the prerequisites. So the Azure Developer CLI requires to have Git installed and the GitHub CLI, which I didn't have actually, and Azure CLI, which I did. And then so you can install on a VM, right? And here it says bare metal, but obviously in cloud you use a VM. So we'll do the demo in a VM too. It can be Windows, it can be Linux. I'm actually using the Linux one. So pay attention to the prerequisites. And also, in the next step, we'll talk about templates. The kind of application that you're deploying has a template, and that template may also require additional prerequisites, like the one I've used to deploy a Node app to app service, which also required Node in itself. Okay, so you can install Azure Developer CLI, right? You go to learn.microsoft.com/Azure Developer, Azure Developer CLI, or just use your favorite search engine. You can run in dev container. I haven't actually tried it, but it sounds good because that has the prerequisites installed, right? So that makes deployment a bit easier if you're just doing a one shot. Okay. So now you've installed all the command line tools, or you're using that dev container. And then you want to do something, right? You want to deploy an app. Here it says you can do C#, you can do Java, you can do Node, but these are just examples, right? The most important is that this is currently in development. So the tool in itself, AZD, isn't done yet. But if once it is done, it really isn't done yet, right? Because the ecosystem will still be evolving. There will be new apps appearing. So, for instance, we're interested in the to-do Node.js MongoDB, right? Because that's closest to what we deployed previously in DevOps Starter. And let's look at this. So this has the full repo of the thing, and it describes what it is. It shows what the app looks like. It shows what kind of prerequisites this has, right? Remember I said it wants to have Node installed. And how you use it, AZD. So the command is AZD, and you do up and then a template. What's interesting there is that you can be prompted for following information: environment name, Azure location, Azure subscription, right? If you're used to deploying to Azure, you know that in Azure you work with resource groups, right? So there will be a resource group with your deployment, and there will be an Azure region used to deploy to, and a subscription to deploy it in. When you do this interactive pop-up, you have to be aware that the tool AZD has the ability to actually do pop-ups. Because when I did this first in web-based Bastion, like I have here, right? I'm using a Bastion host to SSH over HTTPS into my Linux machine. That didn't work. It broke. But it does work in Windows Terminal, for instance. So if you do WSL2 in Windows Terminal, then you do get that pop-up, for instance, to do sign in into Azure portal. Okay, what works if you use these parameters in the AZD up command? Okay, just to be aware. Okay, so one step back, AZD template list. AZD template list. So as you saw in the docs, there are 3 apps for C#. There are templates, right? There's 2 for Node, for Java, 4 for Node, 4 for Python. Oh, bloody hell, this is... Let's just clear this thing. Okay. So you can list the templates with AZD template list. And as I said, the provided templates are described here. But then here you also see for more community contributed templates, browse, which is cool. So I can go there and look at all the Azure Developer CLI templates. Right, so it uses the topic AZD templates, and that will recognize a repo to be listed in here. There's 29 listed. If you go down, you'll see like something service bus with function, the to-do node with Mongo database, and then deploy to Azure Container Apps. And this is actually the one we're using today, to-do Node.js Mongo. Okay. What else? Right, so you deploy this using, and I have to cheat here to get the command. So you do AZD up and you use a template, right? Because you have to provide the input that you want to instantiate. And then you use -E for the environment name. You use subscription to provide the GUID, and -L for the region, which is West Europe in my case. When you run this command, it will start getting all the files from the GitHub repo and then start deploying it. The deployment ends like this. So as you remember, maybe the Azure DevOps starter just deployed 3 resources: an app service plan, an app service instance, and application insights. And this does a bit more because we've selected one with a Cosmos DB, right, to store data in. So that's the 4th one. There's not only a web app service, but also an API app service. So the app is a bit more complex, you could say. It's not only a web front end, but also an API layer. Then there's a shared dashboard to show in the Azure portal. It has a key vault to store secrets, and log analytics to store all kinds of logged information. And then when you go to the web instance of app service and click on the URL, it's loading. Look, and you get a fully functional app. So I've already entered a few tasks with the description, with the due date. And so this actually is a functioning app, right, with data stored. You can close the instance and it's still running. Data stored in Cosmos. And then lastly, so the whole point of Azure DevOps Starter is that it helps you get started with DevOps, right? It's not only generating the app. So the difference here is that you first download the template and then deploy it to Azure, but it isn't created in any DevOps environment yet. But there's more. So there's an option to, in the how-to guides, configure deployment pipeline. So you can do AZD pipeline config, and that will take you through a wizard to actually use GitHub Actions or Azure DevOps if you want, and to store this in GitHub. There's a wizard that helps you authenticate to GitHub. It creates an action. Let's look at the code. So this is the code, the full thing. See, it uses the same template. The page, the README is the same as the sample. And then it has specific details for my GitHub action, right? Because it has a GitHub workflow and it has an ADO pipeline. I don't use the Azure DevOps pipeline. It's just the GitHub workflow. So in the secrets in this repo, there's access to my Azure environment configured so that the GitHub action has access there. And this is the workflow that just ran an hour ago. It took 14 minutes, see, quite a long time, but it did everything. So it does set up the job, initialize containers, check out, log in Azure, Azure DevOps provision, Azure Dev provision. So there it does run AZD provision, right? So it deploys the whole thing. And there's the AZD deploy, which deploys the app. And then there's the post checkout and there's the stop containers. So those two take the longest, right? The provision of the resources and the deploying of the app. But it's CI/CD, so it's all fine. Right. So there you have it. The new fancy way of using Azure and a DevOps tool, the Azure Developer CLI. It's in preview. Give it a go. It looks very promising. And as you saw, both the command line options as well as the extensible templates are very exciting. And you can achieve the same thing. So any programming language, any compute, both set up as templates for your infrastructure as code, as well as your app with an action deployed to Azure with just a couple of commands. Thanks for watching.